Hi, this video looks at episodes 1 to 3 of season 4 of The Boys, containing spoilers for them and earlier seasons, as well as other minor spoilers from season 1 of House of the Dragon. I can only ask that everyone behave civilly when discussing spoilers, but be advised, if you really care about spoilers, then steer clear of the comment section. Season 4 of The Boys has been causing a stink for being quote-unquote political, and this has led to some left-leaning individuals pointing and laughing, going, "Oh, you silly beans, don't you know The Boys has always been political? That you've always been the butt of the joke." And to an extent, yeah. Earlier seasons weren't exactly subtle, and the showrunner has done interviews pretty openly dunking on conservatives for whom the subtext of the show was lost. But I think that the conservative outcry and the eye-rolling in response to it has sort of hidden several issues that don't sit right with me about the season that I want to talk about, as someone who is themselves a left-leaning individual. As I'm finishing up with the script and editing of this video, it's around the time that episode 5 is due to release, but I'm deliberately going to stick to the first 3 episodes for a reason I will touch on later. I don't think episode 4 really builds on any of my points, with the exception that more runtime grants the opportunity for furthering the plot in ways I am somewhat critical of for the first 3 episodes, and I have seen nothing from episode 5 or beyond. So, I did consider having a section here trying to essentially prove that I am someone on the quote-unquote political left, but ultimately cut it since this is going to be the first video on this channel and I could be literally anyone. You should not take my word at face value, but I would hope that the points I make do go some way towards setting me apart from the sort of person that thinks The Boys is political, not as a result of its many critiques of modern society, but because the writers made Frenchie bisexual. It's not the main point of this video, but I did want to touch on it anyways, since it segues into one of my main arguments, and I think it warrants discussion since there was an absurd amount of backlash to Colin and Frenchie in particular. How could the writers make Frenchie gay? Well, for one, they don't really need a reason. Bisexual people exist in real life, so they can exist in the show. Why would the writers make Frenchie French when the show takes place in America? It's just an aspect of who he is, and if that's the beginning and end of the explanation, then that's fine by me. But it also reminds me of the discourse around House of the Dragon and the Valerians being black. There was a lot of uproar about how the showrunners had decided to inject politics into the very apolitical Game of Thrones universe by changing the race of one of the families. But then, as the series went on and it transpired that was done for a very deliberate reason, it made Rhaenyra's infidelity very obvious, which was a pretty big deal. Something similar could very easily have happened with Frenchie, and the writers felt like the narrative was more coherent if Colin was male than otherwise. We haven't seen the entirety of the season, and it is possible that a later episode has a story element that is stronger than it otherwise would have been, but again, even if that's not the case, Frenchie being bisexual doesn't need a justification, and that's completely fine. Not everything in a story needs to have a narrative reason, however, having elements of a story that have setup and payoff is basic storytelling, as is the principle of show, don't tell. If something is introduced but never goes anywhere, if something happens without reasonable build-up, or if a character essentially hits you over the head with, "Hi there, I'm going to say things you recognise as bad because the writers seemingly want to use this as a shorthand for you recognising I'm meant to be viewed as a villain," all of these lead to unsatisfying stories. And I do get it to an extent. Subtlety only goes so far when you have supposed fans of the show meeting Anthony Starr and being shocked he's not actually like Homelander, so maybe you decide that we as viewers deserve all the subtlety of a brick to the face. But I dislike how the show seems to have shifted away from trusting the audience to have somewhat decent media literacy. I got whiplash when Sage dropped the phrase "ban critical soup theory" when talking to Newman, because there hadn't been any build-up to it at all, and it felt like the writers thought that we as the audience needed a way to know that this Machiavellian character that recently had 3 people brutally murdered in order to set up a false flag attack to discredit support for Starlight was someone we were meant to view as a villain. Her actions don't speak for themselves. Instead, we're meant to make the connection that, oh, that's a parallel to critical race theory. That's what the bad people in politics in real life try to enact bans on, so Sage is meant to be a bad person? And this isn't to say that this couldn't have been an apt plotline for season 4, where the show tries to mirror the absurdity of CRT in schools as a conservative talking point. If, say for the sake of argument, Vought and the Seven decide to single out someone in higher education with legitimate grievances about soups, and they tracked superhero-related accidents and malfeasance, and publicly went on the offensive about how the next generation was being brainwashed into hating the nation and hating superheroes, that'd be a narrative right at home in the show. I don't know if this is a result of my terrible memory, or if I was scrolling on my phone too much when watching, but I remember no setup at all. CST was just name-dropped out of nowhere, seemingly to make us think poorly of Sage. A similar thing happened with Firecracker, someone who I think had the potential to be a rather interesting side villain. Her public persona is that of someone who is very far to the right, but in actuality she is just opportunistic and mainly looking to settle a score with Starlight, not caring who or what she has to step on to get there. I think there's a lot of potential there, but it was missed since the decision was made that she started off unhinged in order to have us dislike her. Consider this instead. What if she was still someone who has her eyes firmly fixed on Starlight, but she doesn't start off so incredibly unhinged? She's someone that starts off as a more quote-unquote reasonable conservative, but starts to see that she needs to go further right in order to captivate and retain her audience, so she does. Behind the scenes, when the mask slips, she still expresses it's a grift. She doesn't actually care. It just motivates the masses and gives her relevance, allowing her to get to the Seven and take a shot at Starlight. There is a lot that could be said about how conservative outrage is manufactured and astroturfed in order to give cover to the interests backing them, and I think that Firecracker could have been an excellent opportunity to explore that, but instead she just comes out of the gate swinging about vaccines and trans people. And that's why we're supposed to think of her as a villain, not because she's an antagonist to Starlight and doesn't care who gets hurt along the way. What I also dislike thus far is that all of this is happening in favour of exploring existing characters and how they're reacting to Sage's manipulations, the Cold War between the boys and Newman, or the other members of the Seven that have been overlooked. Why even have the character of Firecracker, for example? I'm inclined to argue that you could instead have the Deep, a character we already know to be a secondary villain, seethe and develop resentment towards Starlight for how she ruined his career, and follow the character trajectory we discussed with Firecracker. After all, he was made to beat someone to death by a usurper in episode 1, and rather than this being a catalyst to change for the better, like what seems to be happening with A-Train, this could have been his breaking point where he decided that he's a joke because of Starlight, and he needs to put her in her place no matter the cost. I do feel obliged to reiterate though that there are still more episodes to come which could give answers. I think that episodes 1 to 3 should have been able to stand somewhat on their own because they seem to have been intended to be the hook for this season. And 3 episodes is plenty of time to do the necessary setup for showing the villainy of the new characters rather than just having them announce it. I think that, in summary, my issue with season 4 so far has been that it feels somewhat half-baked. This isn't to say I think it's bad. These days I watch very few TV shows, so the fact that I'm willing to sit down and watch The Boys does in itself say something. But I had opinions, and the world definitely needed yet another discussion video on this topic, and not even in a timely manner. Hey there! That's all for this video. I hope you enjoyed Baby's first media critique. This isn't my first time making videos, but it was so radically different to what I have done in the past that I felt a new channel was appropriate. I don't know what follow-ups will come, but I've done the song and dance about making content saying I'm going to make content enough times to know there's no point in doing that. Just make content and let it speak for itself. Drop a follow if you liked what I had to say. Please behave in the comments when it comes to spoilers, and I hope you have a nice day.